Hello, BookTube. Welcome back to my channel. I have a Virginia matchup today. So I have the amazing Katrina Brown, and I'm sure if you're watching this or if you see it later that you probably already subscribed to her channel, but she participates in just about every readathon, reading event, all the sprints, everything. Just wrapped up the old school April, which I was kind of upset. That looked super cool. I did not get a chance to participate in that. I just didn't have the time this month. But yeah, that looked really fun.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. And if you just watched like one old movie or like 80s movie or like a TV show, a cartoon or anything, like we would still be like, you did it. You participated.
Nice. Now I'm still like thinking about your DuckTales rendition.
It was so bad.
Oh gosh.
It went on like way longer too, and I was like, I need to just cut this off. And that's how I was gonna open that vlog before I decided to switch it over to something else. But I was like, yeah, I can't open with that. People will be
The
like, bye.
No, I think it would have been the hook. It would have been the bait. It would have drawn them in. I was like, oh, I remember that show. It was great.
Do you remember the Robin Hood movie from the 70s with the fox as Robin Hood? Yeah,
Yes.
one of my friends,
Wow.
Crystal, sang the song like at the end, and she did such a great job. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's so good. She like snapped her fingers and like sang the song, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna do Ducktales, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's so hard. I'm just used to
I thought it was
karaoke.
great. I thought it was
Oh,
great.
thank
You
you.
were committed to it. Hello, Stephen. Yes, hard to believe. Third of the year is gone. Lady Jane, so good to see you. And Kevin, of course, Kevin's in the book club. So, um, yeah, if anyone has anything to say about the book as we're talking about it, feel free to chime in. Um, so I guess I'll start out with you, Katrina, because you are familiar with this author. So we read the remaking by Clay McLeod Chapman. I always want to get the last names reversed there for some reason, but we read this for Black Hearts Book Club, and this was actually Katrina's suggestion, and it looked really cool. It's set in Virginia, so of course I had an initial buy-in right there. But I guess just tell us a little bit about your experience with this author previously, some of the things you've read by him before.
Oh yeah. So I think this is his first book. I think, if I'm not mistaken. But I've read Whisper Down the Lane and Ghost Eaters, which came out last year, and I absolutely loved that book. If yeah, if you're familiar with Richmond, Virginia, you'll probably absolutely loved it. So I'm biased
Yeah.
about that because he talks about Richmond vampire. It opens up in Hollywood Cemetery with people like
Ooh.
breaking into the cemetery and going to the crypt where the Richmond vampire is. So I was immediately like, yes, I'm biased. This is a 5 star. And yeah, it was a very emotional book too. That I got. I think I cried while I read it. I was a mess.
Really?
Yeah, I was like Richmond, and I'm crying. I love it. 5 stars. Whisper Down the Lane is kind of like about the satanic panic. So it goes back to the 80s and then it's present time. And I gave that one 4 stars. So I went 4 stars, 5 stars. And are we going to
Mm,
say our ratings?
we can. Go ahead and tell us what you rated the remaking.
I rated the remaking 4 stars.
Okay. I'm not in the business of giving ratings. I feel like it's so difficult because like it's apples and oranges when you get into, well, you rated this classic book a 5, but then you also rated this horror book a 5. So I would just like agonize over it so much that I don't usually do ratings like on my Goodreads anymore, just because it gave me too much anxiety. But if I had to give this a rating, I would say somewhere between a 3 and a 4. So I really enjoyed and I don't know, I don't know if you'd call it mixed media or not, but like the 4 different perspectives, I really liked that. I liked how that was set up. But I have to agree with what you said in your video. It wasn't as scary as I expected it to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely a cool story, and I haven't read anything quite like it before. So it was a really good book. It just was different than I expected it to be, I guess.
Yeah, I wanted more like spooky stuff happening in it. I feel like with Ghost Eaters, it's like he goes full like spooks with that, and
Yeah.
he has some pretty terrifying scenes in that book. So maybe it's just coming from Ghost Eaters too, and being like, I know you've done this before. I guess since this one came beforehand, but I'm like, I know Clay. He writes scary stuff, and then not being scared. But I also listen to this on audio, so sometimes it can get lost in audio, some scary stuff. But I slowed it down, and I was like, okay, is anything like scary gonna like scary? And like the atmosphere felt a bit off too. Like it didn't feel like very scary until the very end,
Yeah,
like
I
for
agree.
me.
What's funny about that is when it first started out, because so basically for anyone who's not familiar with the book, we have like 4 timelines. So it starts out in the 1950s around a campfire, and we're hearing this little folklore legend about this mother-daughter team that are burned alive as witches. And in the 70s, we have a horror film that's made, Don't Tread on Jessica's Grave. And then in the 90s, we have a remake, of course, I Know What You Did on Jessica's Grave. And then in 2016, we finish up with a podcast. And initially, when I first started the book, I was like, oh yes, it's got the ambiance. Like it has the spooky vibes going for me, because I don't know, I liked how he started with around the campfire. It
Yeah, the
really start
opening was really good.
Yeah. I feel like the opening and the ending were really good. Because I always love, I've read a couple of books that have the podcast feel to it, and I love books like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I love like crime and murder podcasts, and I love reading obviously. So I
Same.
like it when
Yeah.
they mix that up. So
I liked how the podcaster too felt like an outsider. Like he
yeah.
was kind of like an outsider. Maybe having that part be a little bit longer too, like being with the podcaster and having like that mystery aspect of it and him trying to get answers and stuff. I liked that part, but it felt very rushed too at the end. I was like,
Yeah.
this is going fast because it's only 300 pages, so and it switches timelines so quickly. The only person we're with a long time is I forget her name, the actress
Amber. Amber
Amber. Yeah,
Pendleton.
yeah. So we're with her, I guess, the longest, and yeah, I liked her. I liked her '90s POV. I feel like the kids' POV was just like flat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like more could have been done with that because of how I disliked the mom so much.
Oh yeah, the mom was awful.
Oh, she was terrible. And I feel like this is you know, the typical story of the child actor who becomes like the train wreck because they're just so damaged by all of the, I'll just go ahead and call it abuse, like the abuse that they suffer at the hands of, in this case, it was her mother, kind of forcing her into this. It was ridiculous. I'm going to say hey to Bradley. Very cool. Southern Victory book, great alternative history. It's a former history student of mine, reading some history. Love it, love it.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
funny that they were burned alive too, because in the States, during the witch trials and stuff, nobody was ever burned. That's a European thing. Here they
yeah,
were hung, or was it drowned? I don't know if they drowned him, but I know they didn't do burnings.
they did not. And actually, we're definitely going to get into that because we have a Virginia connection there, which we thought this book might be related to. Kevin said, I agree with three or four. I didn't love the focus on making of the movies as much as the early or late parts. And the podcaster just came out of nowhere with no background.
Yeah, I was kind of confused when it switched to the 20, is it 2014 or 2016
Yeah.
uh, thing. I was like, who is this again?
Yeah.
But I also really liked it. I liked seeing Amber older and just, yeah, living her best life, I guess.
Oh God, that was
Her
so
son.
grim. It
Yeah.
was so grim. You know, she probably is representative of a lot. I don't want, I mean, I'm making just a blanket statement here based on nothing at all. But, you know, that's probably the fate of a lot of kind of B movie actors, you know, as far as her storyline of going to the horror conventions. And she, you know, she actually doesn't, it seems like people who do that generally like it, but sometimes not, I suppose. And she definitely did not. She was doing it because she needed the money, and she, you know, just she's kind of scarred by her experience on this movie because she was so young, and I can definitely see that with some child actors, not necessarily just from horror films, but just, you know, child actors in general. And then they're kind of stuck in that role, and then it's like, well, what do they do? Because the formative part of their life where they would be discovering like maybe a career or another passion or pursuing an education, that was kind of taken from them, right, in
Yeah.
pursuit of this. So they don't really sometimes have a backup plan. So I really felt bad for her, even though she wasn't necessarily a likable character.
Yeah, she had some issues, but it's all relating back to her childhood, to when
Yeah.
it was, yeah, it felt very realistic, her arc, I guess.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, I just wanted more creepy stuff to be happening.
I did too, but I did like, and I don't know if maybe because he focused on when he was doing the chapters on the making of the horror film and then the making of the remake, there were like little kind of tongue-in-cheek things and like references to movies and stuff like that, which was really cool. Like it's really cool to see pop culture references in there. Like the one that sticks out is the reference he has in the book to the film. Is it Three Men and a Baby? Is that what it's called? It's the one with Tom Selleck.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and that's a cursed. Is that a cursed film or something bad happened?
So supposedly in one of the scenes, you can see the ghost of this young boy in the background because supposedly they filmed it in a house that was haunted. But it's funny. I had never heard of it. I'd seen the film. They used to play it on TV a good bit, like back in the day, and um, I didn't remember this at all, but I looked it up, and sure enough, you know, a lot of people talked about it, like so much so that like Tom Selleck and the other actors kept getting asked about it. And apparently it was a cardboard cutout of like one of the other actors or something that they had on set. And he's like, no, it wasn't haunted. Like this is like just totally one of those urban legend type things that gets started. Um,
Yeah,
but it's
like the
still
Wizard
pretty
of
cool.
Oz, like the Wizard of Oz thing, and it was like an ostrich or something in the background, actually, like lifting its head up. Like,
Oh,
yeah, they're like, oh yeah, that's not it. It was actually like an ostrich or something we had in the background. It wasn't something yeah, it was somebody unaliving themselves. It
Yeah.
was like the neck of the ostrich. I don't know why there was an
Oh,
ostrich
okay.
there.
Yeah. I'd always heard, yes, that it was one of the actors that, you know.
Yeah, but it was just like an animal, like a loose animal in the background.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I see. I didn't know that that one had been debunked. Not that I'd looked into that one much, but I had heard of it. So I'll have to look at that. Um, well, I guess this brings us to what the author. Well, let me get to Kevin first. He says, "What did you guys make of Amber continuing to think it was her mother who rescued her when it was actually her co-star? I didn't know if her mom had lied to her or she just assumed it was her mom picking her up in the woods. What did you think about that?"
It could have been that her mom lied to her about it, and she was just so young, and that was very traumatic because it made you think in the book too that she was going to die. Like
Yeah,
you thought she died, and um, yeah, it could have been her mom lied to her, and her think it didn't know that it was her mom, or she thought it was her mom because she's just like, oh, that's like gonna fix everything then. If
yeah,
you came to my rescue, like that, we'll forget everything else that you've ever done to me. So
yeah. I think there was, like you said, a bit of like naivety there because she's, thinking that's what a mom is supposed to do, and she wants to believe that her mom did rescue her. But yeah, I think her mom straight up lied just to make her feel
yeah,
better. Yeah, and the mom, there was a bit of jealousy there between the mom and the actress who was playing Amber's mom in the film. And I think that
yeah,
too, that probably goes back to her not fulfilling her own dreams of being an actress.
and now she's fulfilling it through her kid, like living vicariously through her kid.
I hate that.
That's sad.
It's so sad. It's so sad. I mean, even when you see it in real life, because like, we all know those parents. But
Yeah,
it's sad for the kids and it's sad for the adults as well because I've seen a great many young people grow up, and what happens is eventually they do strike out on their own, and they do, sometimes tend to kind of take the opposite route of what that parent has kind of forced upon them. So it's kind of sad. It never seems to turn out well when you have a parent trying to fulfill personal dreams and kind of pushing that on a kid. Pretty sad.
yeah, and in the 70s too, it's like there was no law, like there wasn't a lot of laws in place to protect the child actors and actresses and stuff too. Like I'm sure it was really bad. Like now there's like they have to take certain breaks, they have to have their school done, they have to like have all these sign-offs, they have to have their own lawyers and representation and stuff, separate from their parents. So now everything's there's new laws and stuff that have been made, and like back in the day it was like, okay, work 12 hours, you're 7.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, so I think uh, Clay definitely did his research, or just like knew, just from I guess watching movies and stuff, and like watching documentaries, that like, oh, this happened all the time.
Yeah. Does he I don't know much about him. What is his background? I mean, what did he do before?
I actually don't know a ton. I've listened to him on a couple podcasts, talking about like Stephen King and horror movies and stuff. But I don't.
Oh, it does say on here he also writes for the screen. So, maybe he does have some kind of inside
Yes.
knowledge.
He wrote that movie Grindel and Wild that came out on
Okay.
Netflix around Halloween last year with like Jordan Peele produced it, and it's like a little animation kids movie, and it's actually really cute. So I do know he wrote that, and he writes a podcast too. I listen to, so he likes podcasts too.
Well, that's yeah, he definitely incorporated that into the book, and at least one or two other people in the group also listened to it as an audiobook. And I, once I got to the podcast part, I was like, dang, this was kind of a missed opportunity. Like, I wish I had listened to it because I feel like it would have been, a little bit of a more immersive, I guess, experience for the ending. But still very, very cool how he handled that. What did you think of the writing style overall for this book? And how does it compare to the other stuff you've read from him?
I felt like the writing was pretty standard in this. Like it was pretty to the point. It didn't read like stereo instructions or anything, but it was just like to the point. It was like pretty clippy, I feel like, and I don't want to say nerdy, but like there's a lot of like movie references and stuff in
Yeah.
this where I was like, this is really like nerd stuff, which is totally fine. I'm a big horror movie fan. I'm wearing a Killer Clowns shirt right now, but like I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of a deep cut. Like I don't know if that's gonna be for everybody. Like coming into this, that
Yeah.
doesn't typically watch horror movies or read horror books all the time. But I thought it was good. But definitely Ghost Eaters is by is my favorite book by him. The writing is so great, and you could tell um, he's grown, I guess, as a writer and took a little bit more risk. Like I really like it when authors do something that like you could tell they're really passionate about or they really want this scene to work, and they go for it and they do it, and it's like it could be like kind of an outrageous thing, like because I'll say Ghost Eaters, there's some outrageous stuff that happens in that, but it's also scary, and it's like big. It's like a big moment, and I feel like this book was kind of lacking that. And Whisper Down the Lane too. I feel like Whisper Down the Lane is more of a thriller book, like it's more tense. But I really wanted like just like a really cheesy, if it's cheesy or like a monster scene, like where is the ghost? Like
Yeah.
I feel like we didn't really get that. But also that could be him playing on like the urban legend thing, like is it true or is it not true? So that's what I took away from it. But I was just like, I guess I'm just in my like I just want a scary scene phase of my
Yeah.
life where I'm like, okay, where's the horror gonna happen? But I get why maybe he restrained himself. I don't know, or this was
Yeah,
his whole idea.
because a couple of times I feel like he could have easily taken a couple of scenes there. Like he was close, but then it didn't happen. Like I was waiting for it to happen and it
Yeah.
didn't happen. And I'm like, I guess it's all gonna culminate at the end. Like I kept just waiting, like it's gonna happen. But um yeah, I liked it was definitely short and to the point. It was not, you know, anything super unusual about the writing, but I did feel like some of it was interesting in that he wrote kind of like how the person was thinking. Like right now, how I'm talking with like the ums and the like missteps. Like I feel like that was included in some of it. So that was kind of cool. Kevin said, I thought a lot of it was spoofing or mocking things like horror movies and urban legends. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Actually, I looked it up because on a couple of sites, and I can't remember where, but it was several sites I looked at. It talked about this being based on a true folk tale, legend, whatever. So, of course, Katrina and I, being from Virginia, this book being set in Virginia, we're like, this has to be based on Grace Sherwood, who, for those of you that are not familiar with the story, if you go to Virginia Beach, you may drive on Witch Duck Road. And Witch Duck Road is named after this incident with Grace Sherwood. And I think it was the early 1700s. I want to say like 1706, somewhere in there. She was the last woman accused of witchcraft in the state of Virginia. And what they did was they tied her thumbs to her toes and dumped her in the river. And the idea, of course, is that if you are innocent, the water doesn't reject you and you drown. But if you float or if you manage to save yourself, then an innocent person would just die. You're guilty. So she actually does escape her restraints, and she claws her way to the bank. And they don't execute her, but they do sentence her to 7 years in prison. And she kind of lives in seclusion afterwards. But she does live quite a long life. But they do have a statue of her in Pungo. She's called the Witch of Pungo. Pungo is like a very, my husband's from Virginia Beach, so that's kind of why I'm familiar with the area. But it's more of a rural part of Virginia Beach. But they have a statue of her, and I think you were talking about the statue in the group.
Yeah, I was like, I think this is based off of this or a statue in my vlog. I was like, I'll put the picture up because the statue is really cute. She has like a little raccoon like on her dress, like feeding a raccoon or something. And I was like, always kind of, because we'd always go to Virginia Beach, like every summer, and we drive by it or be stopped at it because it's like in a weird spot too because it's like right there, like where there's a bunch of shopping centers.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, the last accused witch of Virginia. What's that about? And I think Atlas Obscura has an article about her, and I read about it like a couple years ago, the last time I went. And I was like, oh, it just made me think of it, the Legend of Jessica. So I didn't know they actually threw her in the river, though. I
Yeah.
didn't know
Mm-hmm.
that. Good for her. Good for her getting out, though.
Yeah. What's
Like,
what's interesting is, so she had been accused and brought to trial a couple of times, and she had been acquitted. Like, and it's the usual thing. She dealt in herbs. She was kind of a bit of a healer. She had an affinity for animals. She had a great love for animals, which I think is why they included the raccoon. I don't know if there was if she had a pet raccoon or not. I don't know. But I know like she had an affinity for animals. And her husband were actually pretty successful farmers. Like, they had a good piece of property, they had a very successful farm. And I think when people in the area, when like their cow died or their crops failed, and they saw her and her husband, prospering, it created a little bit of resentment there. And it's interesting because I think a lot of those kind of situations where people are accused of witchcraft, some of it, is economic. Like, I think some people are like going after somebody's assets, somebody's resources, because they actually, while she's in prison, they do take her property from her as well. So it kind of makes you think like that's might be one of the reasons. And of course, because she's, different and that sort of thing. But very cool story. And I will say, at least Virginia has this going for her. We never executed anyone for witchcraft,
yeah.
even though we did have, so we do have that going for us. But we did, have, I don't know how many, but we did have people charged with it, and a couple of men too. There were a couple of men thrown in there in Virginia as well. So I assumed, and I think you did as well, you know, I assumed might be the basis for his story, but I read online somewhere, again, I'm failing tonight as far as like doing research for this live show, but I read that he was basing it on a legend from the early 1900s in Kentucky, where a young girl and her mother, and their last name was Ford, just like in the book, um, were burned for being witches, but it actually come to find out that that story is false. That never happened. That is just a straight
Oh,
up. So it's funny. It's funny if that's true, if that's what he's basing it on, because it kind of plays into this whole idea of these, urban or rural legends, and you know how they're kind of cyclical, and how sometimes they're based on something real but the story gets changed, and sometimes um, how they're based on a complete and utter farce. So I think that's kind of
yeah.
funny if that's true. I don't, again, my research is kind of flimsy here, but um you know
Yeah, I maybe he was inspired by like both a little bit because I feel like um Pilots, is it Pilots Creek or the
yes,
name of the place? It the way it sounded like it was very Virginia Beach
yeah,
area or like the beachy area of Virginia. Yeah, so maybe he was inspired by both of those. But I do. It does seem like he takes a lot of inspiration from real life stuff. So like with Whisper Down the Lane, um, is the McCloy, not McCloy, that's his name, McDonald preschool trials that happened in California in the 80s, and Ghost Eaters is like there's a lot of history in that, like Richmond history, like about the fire and stuff. Like he ties in a bunch of old history into that. That as a Richmonder, you just know it, or for being a Virginian
yeah,
or going to museums and stuff. You're just like, oh yeah, that did happen, and like he's just kind of bringing it up. So you can tell he really likes history. So he was probably like, I want to write like an urban legend book. So it's like we don't, from the book itself, he created his own little urban legend. Like he does, you don't know if it's real or not.
yeah, yeah. I think that's cool. Now that I know that, I think it kind of makes me like the book a little bit more. I don't know, um, but I definitely need to add the Ghost Eaters. Probably going to put that
Yeah.
on next year's Black Hearts Book Club. I think that would be a good pick. Um,
It
Kevin said, I never understood why the people who threw women in the river weren't guilty of murder if the victims drowned. They admit they drowned an innocent person, so shouldn't they be punished? I'm going to assume, Kevin, that they would just say they were doing the Lord's work. They would have some
yeah.
sort of, reasoning or justification behind that.
Oh
But
yeah, they're super
yeah,
righteous about
yeah.
murdering people.
I mean, and Crystal, hello, two of
Hi,
my favorite
Crystal.
girls. Oh, which is fascinate me. How are you? Good to see you. Urban legends are great. Well, I guess we could talk a little bit about urban legends. Do you have any like urban legends or things that you were told as a kid that like always fascinated you or you were scared of?
I think one that I can remember is when I was in high school. My boyfriend came from his family lived in like Alexandria, like Fairfax area, and he told me about the Bunny Man urban legend up there. There's like a bridge that a guy dressed in a bunny suit with an axe like hangs out in or under because he like escaped a mental institute and he was like killing people. But I feel like that's a really like popular urban legend. It's not like a niche urban legend to an
Maybe the
area. But
bunny suit was added. I like the bunny suit though. That gives it a nice touch.
yeah, and I remember him like taking me to the bridge and being like, "This is where it is. This is the Bunny Man Bridge and stuff." And I was like, "I don't see an axe wielding man in a bunny suit, so I think we're good." That's the only
That's
one I can
pretty
think
funny.
of off the top of my head. But I I guess like there or Bloody Mary's an urban legend, right? A little bit that
Yeah.
turned into a game. Yeah, I think that would be interesting. I feel like urban legends and like folklore like go hand in hand.
Yeah, for
Do
sure.
you have
I,
do you
I,
have any urban legends?
well, I guess because where I live, they would be considered a rural legend. Um, and just by the way I say that word, how I cannot say it, I guess tells you everything you need to know about
That's a
where
hard
I grew
word to
up.
say.
It is. But so there's a local lake, and I always heard that they removed the diving board because they used to have a diving board out in the lake, and they took it down for a long time. And I always heard that the reason they took it down is because a kid jumped off the diving board and there was a nest of poisonous snakes underneath, and that they were just killed by the poisonous snakes, and they were like, it was like a big deal. Of course, this is a total fabrication. And it's funny because when this story just like will not die. Like it's still around. But I actually used to work at this lake. It's a park. And through working there, I found out that every so often they test the water quality, and if the water quality, as far as like clarity, is not to a certain level, and a lot of it has to do with stuff falling from the trees because there's a lot of trees around the lake. But if the water quality isn't a certain level, they can't have a diving board. So that's the reason
Oh,
that the diving
but
board was
that's
removed.
boring. That's a boring
I know that's a
reason.
boring. It's so much better if it's a den of poisonous snakes under that water, which
Yes.
made me very fearful of swimming in the lake as a kid. I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't go in the lake. I can't go in the lake.
That would be terrifying. Like, to, because if you're already in mid jump, like, you can't get out of there.
No,
That's the creepiest. That is creepy and scary.
and it's funny because we in the area I'm in Virginia, we don't have but one type of poisonous snake. I mean, all we have is a copperhead. And very rarely like you'll get like one random like rattlesnake or something, or a cottonmouth that rides in like on a, you know, tractor trailer or something, like, you know, very randomly. So it's like the likelihood that this was true, we should have known it was false, but you know, you're a kid, you're scared. There is another one though that's kind of funny. So one of the counties near me, their high school mascot is the cougar. Okay. And there are people all around, farmers, local landowners, who will swear up and down that there are mountain lions, that there are cougars out here that have attacked their livestock. And you know what's funny? I have seen some game camera footage that looks very, I mean, you can definitely tell the difference between a bobcat and a cougar because of the long tail. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
big difference. And so I think that there is the possibility that we are starting to see some in the area. But what's funny is my whole life there has been this legend about a circus train, because the train runs through here. A circus train had an accident. There was a derailment, and some of the animals got loose. And of course, the mountain lions were loose. And they just, you know, run amok to this day, you know, that those are the mountain lions that we're seeing. And it's funny because the one of the local papers on April Fool's Day a few years back, they photoshopped a picture of a cougar like in the parking lot of like the local Walmart, put it on the
That's
front page of the
funny.
paper. And you had to like turn to a different page to see that it was like April Fool's. But I thought that was pretty clever.
Oh, that's funny. Have you read any Robert McCammon books?
I have not, but that name sounds familiar.
He wrote this book called Usher's Passing. That's a retelling of Usher, the Fall of the House of Ushers, but it takes place in North Carolina, and that story just reminded me because there was like a circus or a zoo that was on this land because the family was very rich, and after like the economic like downturn, like the depression happened, and they had to let all the animals just go, and they're in the mountains of North Carolina. And
Oh,
so there's
so
this Black Panther called Greedy Guts, and he's still roaming to this day. Like, so
missed
yeah, that's.
opportunity. I should have written that story.
I know. I was like, that sounds like Usher's passing a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
um, but now I'm like, I wish I named my cat Beans Greedy Guts because of a Black Panther named Greedy Guts. It's just
Oh
so
my
funny.
gosh. Aaron says the local legend from around my area is the story of who put Bella in the Wickham, where a couple of schoolboys found a woman's corpse stuffed in a Wickham during World War II. It's still a mystery. Oh my gosh, yeah,
That's so
that's
sad.
something a podcast should talk about and investigate. That was something kind of cool that I see coming out in podcasts and in books that kind of like use that angle is that some cases are solved because of these podcasts and because of people talking about these crimes.
Yeah. I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara helped catch, is it Joseph D'Angelo? What was his nickname? I forget, but he was like, he was awful. And they caught him because of this, like, book that kind of put the pressure on, I guess, a little bit more. And I think Paul Holes was one of the investigators and did the DNA ancestry, and that's how they got him.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I forget that, like, what
The Golden State
the
Killer
Golden
was
State
that?
Killer. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, and yeah, now he's behind bars. Um, but yeah, they like followed him and like got a cup that he used at a fast food place and matched it to like somebody that did a DNA test, and yeah, it's crazy. It's like, yeah, that stuff is, it's important, I think, too, to like
yeah.
not talk to still talk about it, because I think they solved another case in Australia, the what is it called? The something man. I can't think of it, but it's like the man that was just on the beach. They didn't never knew his name, and they just figured out his name. And yeah, so it's still happening. Like they're still solving cold cases. It's just like they just need that extra push, I guess, or like more people to know about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the more people know about it, the more people talk about it. And I think too, the perpetrators, when it starts becoming mainstream and people are talking about it, like they can't help but talk about it. Like eventually I feel like sometimes they can't help themselves. Like they feel like they have to talk about it.
Yes,
Um
the
the
Somerton
Somerton
man.
man.
Yeah, they just found that guy's identity out, and it was like a big mystery because they all they had to go by was like his suit and like what was in his whatever in his pockets. He didn't have ID or anything like that. So yeah, that one's really interesting. But the I think who put Bella in the witch elm? I think BuzzFeed Unsolved did that
Okay.
case too. That's how I know about it. But that's like a really sad, um, a sad case. I feel like.
Yeah, I always feel bad for I feel like it's always like kids playing or some like birder walking in the woods or some fisherman or it's like somebody just like going out trying to have fun or trying to like be with nature and they stumble across a dead body. It's like, oh gosh,
And
how
it's never a
traumatizing.
mannequin,
It's
right?
never a
It's never
mannequin,
a
no.
mannequin.
If you're a crime junkie, it's never a
Yes,
mannequin.
never a mannequin. Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah, that I I can't imagine that. But I'm glad that there are people who do that stuff, because sometimes I'm listening to those podcasts, especially the ones where, not the ones where they're just sitting there talking about it, but especially the ones where they're investigative journalists and they're like out there talking to people, and I'm like nervous for them, because a lot of times they're trying to talk to people who were suspects, and I'm just like, you're really putting yourself out there, and
Yeah.
it's it's good that people do that, but I'm just not one of those people who.
Yeah, I think the last podcast I listened to about that is about the Christina or Kristen Smart case. There was a
Yeah,
podcast that a really
I listened to
good,
that one too. Yeah, that was
well
really
produced
good.
one, and now people are arrested. So I think it does help and works.
I hope you don't either, Kevin. That just, oh. I will say the creepiest thing about the Kristen Smart case to me, or the eeriest thing, I don't know why, but it's sometimes little things like this just kind of touch a nerve with me. I remember she was a lifeguard, and she had like a digital watch that she would set an alarm for, like 4:30 in the morning. It was some like unheard of early hour, but she had to get to work to do the early shift. And I remember the people living in that house, they kept hearing for years after, like a beep, beep, beep at that
The
time
alarm, yeah.
every morning. And that just kind of creeped me out so bad, because I'm just like thinking about that poor girl, and there she is this whole time, and like her alarm, like it just, like it's a remnant of her life. And it just, I don't know, it just got me.
Yeah, that part was like unnerving and
Yeah.
so sad. But yeah, that guy did a great job. They did a good job with that podcast. I haven't really listened to any other podcast done that way because they are very like intense and
Yeah.
really effective. Like I feel like you get invested in it. Like I was very invested in the Kristen Smart case, and then when the headlines started to break and stuff, I guess a couple months after I finished it, I was like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah.
this actually had an effect, it seems like, and like pushed and, got more eyes on it and ears on it. So, yeah, that just gave me goosebumps, you talking about that part.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm giving you goosebumps right here, like close to bedtime, but No, sometimes something like that. It's funny. I don't know if you've read I'll have to look up the author, but it's the Wolf and the Watchman. Have you read that book?
No.
All right, it's called The Wolf and the Watchman, 1793, a novel. And it is the author, I cannot pronounce his name. It's like Nicholas Not Dag. He's Swedish, so it's, translated. But that book, that's the only book I've ever read that made me feel weirded out before bedtime. Like
Really?
it gave my body like a I don't know, like I had the willies. If you read that book, let me know what you think about that, because I would be curious, because it's kind of historical fiction. It's a mystery, but it is very graphic in what happens to the victim. And this victim, I don't want to tell you everything that happened, and Kevin's chiming in because we read it for Black Hearts in
Yeah, I
January, I
think
think. But
I did borrow it before because I think I was gonna read it for your book club, but
yeah,
on Libby, so I'll definitely listen to it.
you should definitely, because I think I would be curious to see if it gives you the same feeling, because I know you're probably it kind of takes a lot to get me like scared or upset about a book. And I feel like you've read so much horror that
Yes.
it would take something pretty special to keep Katrina Brown up at night. But yeah, I feel like this, it gave me like, it almost made me feel, and I kind of cringe at saying this word, but like violated. Like I just felt like this book and how the victim was treated just violated humanity so to the extreme that it made me feel weird for days after, just thinking about the victim and what they went through. And I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to give it away, but yeah, it was a
It's
lot. And there's a sequel to that as well,
oh,
but I
okay.
I don't know if that's been translated yet because I'm gonna look into that because I want to try to read the sequel probably next year at some point. But
Oh, I'll definitely have to check it out. And it's like an old timey.
yeah, it's set. Um, I want to say it's like just after the French Revolution has occurred. So kind of Europe is kind of in a state of kind of upheaval. It's set in Stockholm, so you know, I want to say one of their leaders had been assassinated or there was an attempted assassination. So there's some kind of like political groups at play. So there's like a lot going. It's a very like chaotic time period. Um, but there's some really dark stuff in that book. Just really dark. Um, it was very disturbing. And it takes a lot to disturb me, but that book, yeah, it kind of stuck with me. Yeah.
I will have to check it out. I think if you're talking about like getting scared before bedtime, I think the last book to honestly do that was Pen Pal. I think
I need to read that.
yeah.
Everyone has loved that book so much.
It's just one of those ones where you're like looking out the window and you like close the curtains, and you draw the blinds, and you're like, okay, nobody's out there. Like it is like it's unnerving, and it's based off of I think a creepy pasta.
Oh
Or
yeah.
yeah, so it's like it's not a typical. It's not told like in a typical fashion. It's like a guy reflecting on his childhood and like some just creepy events happening in his childhood and him kind of like thinking back at it. But it's very eerie and unsettling. It definitely felt like somebody was watching me. I was like, wait a second, nobody's watching me, right? And there's no audiobook or anything for it, so I think that's even like when you're I feel like I get more into a book when it's quiet and I'm just reading it. It's like, wait, what was that? You know, like
Yeah,
let me investigate for a second just to make sure. But yeah,
for
I love
sure.
it when a book sticks with you too, and you're like, hold on, I have to go check this one thing because this happened in this book, and I don't want that to happen to me.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
not all the time, but sometimes a book does do that. It's effective if it's effective enough.
yeah, for sure, for sure. All right. Well, I think we've covered it. And we actually had more to talk about than I thought we would. We kind of started
Yes.
tonight and we were both like, I don't have like a ton to say. I don't know. But yeah, that worked out really great. I thank you for co-hosting this month with me, Katrina. It was so much fun chatting with you. And if you guys are not subscribed to her channel, make sure you do so. She's like reading so many books and participating in so many readathons, so many sprints. I don't know how you do it. It's super impressive, and always fun to watch. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun. I'm always down to talk about horror books.
Okay, well, if I come up with a good one for next year, I know it's like way, way ahead of time, but if I come up with a 2024 schedule and it's something that you're interested in, maybe you'll co-host another one with me.
Of course, I would love to.
All right, guys. If you popped in the chat, thank you so much for stopping by and saying hey, and we'll see you on the next one.